What films does this episode draw inspiration from? Why do some fans give this episode such low ratings? Why does a blue moon keep turning up whenever Beard goes outside? Keep watching and we'll discuss all these questions and more. Welcome to Square Eyes, a channel where we recap, review and take a sideways look at your favourite TV shows. In this video we'll be looking at episode 9 of season 2 of Ted Lasso, called Beard After Hours. Let's jump straight in. The episode picks up where the last one ended, with Beard walking away from Wembley Stadium after AFC Richmond's 5-0 hammering at the hands of Man City in the FA Cup semi-final. Beard has taken the defeat badly and walks off towards the Wembley Park tube station. Ted tells Beard to take care of himself, almost like he knows Beard has a self-destructive streak and intends to go wild. Then we get a different version of the theme song for Ted Lasso, and there's no opening credit sequence. Instead, there's a time-lapse shot of Beard on the tube. I think this is the show's way of telling us to expect something a bit different from this episode, so don't say you weren't warned, as this is going to be different to a typical episode of Ted Lasso. Beard gets back to his house and turns on the TV, where Gary Lineker and Thierry Henry are analysing the semi-final. It sounds like the usual kind of football punditry to begin with, but gradually they get more personal about Coach Beard, until they're saying he's a snivelling lackey and even criticising his chessboard coffee table. Thierry Henry even says he hates Coach Beard. Beard turns off the TV and heads down to the Crown and Anchor, where he talks to May about his latest breakup with Jane. He told her that he loved her, and she'd not said it back to him. When May tries to talk to Beard about the game, he takes his beer over to a table and looks at his phone. It's full of messages from Jane. Despite them being separated, she still wants to meet up with him. She's going to a club and she says she wants him to come too. Beard starts typing a message that basically says he doesn't want to carry on if she won't say she loves him too, but then he stops before he's finished typing the message and goes back to his drink instead. Baz, Jeremy and Paul sit down with Beard and get him talking about life, the universe and everything in between over the course of many pints, until May calls time on them and they've got to find somewhere else to go. Paul suggests Bones and Honey, but the others say it's too swanky for them to get in. The boys raid the Crown and Anchor's lost property box and look, well, not really smart, but they have jackets on at least, and it gives them a chance of being able to get into the private members club. They trick the woman on the reception of the club into leaving her post and sneak their way into the club. The lads from the pub feel awkward about being in such a swanky place, but Beard gives them a pep talk and tells them to strut around, and that gives them the confidence they need to mingle with the rest of the patrons of Bones and Honey. Beard goes to the bar to get the drinks in and makes eye contact with a striking redhead. Beard tips his hat to her, orders his beers, and by the time he turns back, she's gone. Beard and the guys get involved in a pool game with some posh boys, and they start asking questions about where they studied. Then Beard starts doing a pretty convincing Irish accent and tells them he was a professor at Oxford. The Toffs also went to Oxford and tried to catch Beard out in his lie, but he has very specific answers to all their questions. The guys from Oxford are convinced by Beard's lies and embrace him like a fellow Oxford alumni, and they act like old friends. And Jeremy takes £20 off the posh boys by potting a tricky black on the pool table. Baz asks Beard how he knows all that stuff about Oxford, and Beard replies by saying that he dated a professor from Oxford and that he listens more than he talks. Beard then wanders off into the club, trying to find the red-headed woman that he made eye contact with before, and find himself in a strange room with a bank of TV screens on the wall. Gary Lineker and Thierry Henry come on the screens, and they're making abusive comments about Beard again, just like they were back at his house. Beard jumps up and tears his trousers, which draws the attention of the bouncer, who has to see Beard's membership card, which means his time at Bones and Honey is now over, and he's tossed out on the streets. It's not all bad news for Beard, though, as the red-headed woman from the bar is on the street too, and she offers to repair his trousers for him. When they get to her apartment, she takes his trousers, gives him a pair of brightly patterned trousers to wear instead, and tells him he's dropped his keys. They then have a strange conversation where they talk in vague and profound statements, which sound both deeply meaningful and completely meaningless at the same time. It's the kind of conversation that you have in the early hours after you've got back from the pub, which I suppose is what they're doing. Then Beard picks up the woman's phone, and it's a video call from a very angry man. It's her boyfriend, and he's not happy at all that she's brought Beard back to their apartment. Beard makes a quick exit through the window, being chased by the muscular man. He ends up on the roof, cornered, and has to jump down into a huge skip to escape. In reality, he'd have probably broken both his legs from the fall, but because it's a TV show, he's absolutely fine from his drop, and he brushes himself down and jumps out of the skip he landed in without a scratch. But he's still being chased by the big angry bloke, so he has to jump on a bus to escape. Things don't get much easier for Beard, though, as an old lady on the bus alerts the driver to the fact he's not tapped in. He doesn't have an Oyster card or any other method of payment on him, so he's back on the streets again. Beard next goes to a hotel to ask if he can borrow a phone so he can call a cab to go home. The man behind the counter is incredibly paranoid and unhelpful, and Beard leaves the hotel when he realises the conversation isn't going anywhere. Then Beard ends up down a dark alley and there are three shadowy figures approaching him. He shouts towards them, asking for help, but when he gets closer he realises it's Jamie Tartt's dad and his two mates. The last time Beard had seen James Tartt was when his son Jamie had punched him, and Beard had bounced him out of the Wembley changing room, so Beard does the smart thing and runs away. Only he's not that smart because he runs down a dead end and is cornered by the three men. Then there's a fairly unconvincing slow-mo fight scene, which I guess was inspired by Clockwork Orange, where Beard gets a beating. I think doing it in slow-mo really made it obvious that the blows weren't really landing, and it felt a bit like the fight scenes I did with my mates back in GCSE drama. Things look like they're going to take a nasty turn when one of the men grabs hold of Beard, and Jamie's dad picks up a conveniently placed metal rod. He's just about to smash Beard with it when the angry man from the redhead's apartment clobbers him from behind. He punches one of the others, and the last one scarpers, leaving Beard alone with him. Beard pleads with the muscle man, but he's actually just trying to give him back his wallet and his phone that he left at his flat. As they walk away from the dark alley, the man seems far more reasonable, and it turns out he's just got temper problems. Now Beard's got his phone back, he sees that Jane has left him 52 messages and 72 missed calls. The messages she sends him are a bit bonkers. She starts off saying that she loves him, then the messages swing from angry to sad to desperate. My favourite is one where she tells him she hopes he's dead in the ditch and is eaten by squirrels so that he's only left with his stupid beard. But reading through the thread of messages that she sends him, it's pretty clear that they have a very unhealthy relationship and they're not good for each other at all. Beard gets in a flap when he sees all the messages, but his battery dies on him before he can call or message her back. If only he had one of those Android phones with a larger battery capacity, he might have been alright. But with this being an Apple TV show, they're all wedded to their iPhones. Beard then trudges off into the streets, but a limo pulls up alongside him, and it's Baz, Jeremy and Paul, who have rented the limousine with all the money that they've won at the pool table from the posh Oxford lads. They drop Beard off back at his home, and he gives them an address and tells them to go there and tell Renee that Beard sent them. Then Beard tries to open his front door, but the key breaks in the lock, just as the heavens begin to open. So he runs through the streets and ends up at a church with a neon crucifix outside it. It looks to be the club that Jane sent Beard a picture of in a message earlier in the night. But when Beard goes inside, it seems to be just a normal church. He sits in a pew and talks to God about his problems with his relationship with Jane, and how when he's with her, the world feels more interesting. Baz, Jeremy and Paul arrive at the address Beard gave them, but are a bit nervous. They ask for Renee, and the old man who answers the doors lets them inside. They're shown down a dark tunnel, and given the tone of the episode up to now, it's hard to imagine what depraved delights await them at the end of the tunnel. They ask if it's heaven when they get there, but Renee corrects them and tells them it's Nelson Road, the home stadium of AFC Richmond. The three lads get to have a kickabout on the pitch of their beloved football club to finish off their night. Back at the church, Beard goes for a wander and stumbles into a nightclub, which seems completely bizarre to have a heaving nightclub attached to a deserted church, but I suppose that's in keeping with the tone of this episode. Beard doesn't question it, he just strips off his tracksuit top and throws himself into the dance floor. There he meets Jane, who throws him a hula hoop, and he goes up onto a podium and he dances while spinning the hoop around, which he's genuinely brilliant at. Maybe I'm too easily impressed, but Gary Lineker and Thierry Henry seem to like it too. Then Beard and Jane dance together, and they seem properly happy together, which isn't something we've seen before, as they typically seem to make each other miserable. Then it's the next day at the training ground, and Ted, Nate and Roy are waiting for Beard to arrive to watch back the video of the previous day's game. Beard shows up, bruised and battered, but with hot drinks for his colleagues, and they settle in to watch back the replay of the game, with the Benny Hill theme music playing over the top. Then the camera angle changes, and we see that Beard is still wearing his trousers from the night before. It's hard to review this episode because it's not a normal episode of Ted Lasso. Like the Christmas special earlier in the season, The Carol of the Bells, this episode was written when Apple ordered an extra 2 episodes on top of the initial 10 that were originally planned for this season. So this episode sits outside the main storylines for this season, and it's really like a standalone Beard spin-off episode. Viewed from the perspective of the spin-off, I think it's a pretty superb 40-odd minutes of television. The difficult thing is, it's episode 9 of season 2 of Ted Lasso, so people start this episode wanting to know what's going to happen next with Sam and Rebecca, and how Ted's going to overcome his anxiety, and if the team are going to bounce back from their defeat in the Cup. So straight away, viewers have their noses put out of joint when they don't get what they want. I think this is the reason this episode is the lowest rated out of the whole series on IMDb, with a score of just 6.8 out of 10. No other episode is even close to that low scoring. It also doesn't have the same feel-good tone of the series as a whole, with it borrowing a darker and weirder feeling from the movies that the episode is inspired by. On a personal level, though, I really enjoyed this episode. I've watched it twice now, once before I watched the film after hours, and then again after, and it was more enjoyable the second time around. You don't need to have seen the film that this episode borrows a lot of its mood and story beats from, but it's nice to compare what's the same and what's different, though there are a lot of other film references scattered throughout too, which is another of the enjoyable things about this episode. It's definitely the weirdest episode of Ted Lasso so far, but I quite like it when TV shows try to do things a bit differently. It maybe departs too much from the snappy dialogue that makes Ted Lasso funny, and goes for a more stylish and artsy style that replicates the films that it pays tribute to, but there are still laughs along the way. I don't really go out on wild drunken nights anymore, but there was a time when I did, and this episode reminded me of the best kind of them, when things start off in a fairly familiar environment, and then one thing leads to another, and you end up in a very peculiar situation, with people you were never expected to have been spending the night with. Beard After Hours captured the scary, thrilling, and fun elements of those nights out quite well, and it also captured the feeling the next day when you turn up at work and you're trying to pretend you're a normal, functioning member of society. I can understand why there was a bit of a backlash for this episode, but when I read a few of the online reviews that were critical, I felt like a lot of the negativity came from people who were really just being babies. They didn't get spoon-fed the exact content that they wanted, so had a tantrum and gave the show a bad rating. The people making the show have the right to make whatever they want, and I'm pleased that they're willing to take risks on episodes like this. Not everything will always work, but it's better that than just constantly baby-birding pre-digested content into the mouths of viewers that's been rigorously tested to make sure it'll please their core demographic. I think the series would get stale pretty quickly if they didn't try new things like this. I think it's fine if you didn't like this episode, but I think it's a bit weird if you got angry with the creators for making it. My favourite line in this episode came from Beard when he's talking to the lads in the pub, and he said, "And so, in conclusion, if this is indeed a simulation, which everything in my experience suggests that it is, then all we can do is tip our caps to the rascal pulling the strings." I have read some fairly convincing theories that we might be living in some sort of simulation, and it gets a little bit mind-boggling when you think about it too much. So it doesn't surprise me that after a few beers that Beard might say something along these lines. When Beard says, "Tomorrow will be the most beautiful day of Sarah Coombs' life," he's paraphrasing a line from the movie Fight Club. When the boys say, "Is this heaven?" and Renee says, "No, it's Nelson Road," that's a reference to the Field of Dreams movie. But in that case, Kevin Costner says, "No, it's Iowa." The scene in the tunnel, where Beard encounters Jamie Tartt's dad and his two friends, is very similar to the fight scene in Clockwork Orange. There's a discussion about an Edward Norton film with curb stomping in it, and it's suggested that it's Moonrise Kingdom, but actually that's a completely different and far more innocent Edward Norton film, and they're really thinking about the much nastier American History X. I'd only recommend that you watch that particular scene if you've got a strong stomach. This whole episode is inspired by the 1985 Martin Scorsese film After Hours. The film is about a man in New York that has a bit of a mad night out, and it covers his adventures as he gets into a variety of scrapes around town. Beard After Hours doesn't follow the exact same story, but it's very similar in tone and borrows many of the themes and elements from it. Here are a few of the most obvious elements. There's a mysterious and attractive woman, there's a jealous partner, there's lost keys, there's a nightclub scene, and the main character in After Hours changes his shirt when he goes back to the mysterious woman's apartment, whereas Beard changes his trousers. Beard gives the posh boys at Bones and Honey the fake name Declan Patrick Aloysius McManus, which is the real name of the musician Elvis Costello. There's a running theme in this episode of there being a huge sky blue moon hanging low over London whenever Beard is outside. Blue Moon is famously Man City's song and featured heavily in the previous episode when Man City beat AFC Richmond, and also plays once in this episode too. Once in a blue moon is a phrase for something that doesn't happen all that often, so maybe the blue moons are a sort of nod towards how odd and out of the ordinary this episode is too. The events of this episode won't have any bearing on the overall thrust of this season, as it was written after the bulk of the season 2 was planned. Even Beard and Jane getting back together again by the end of the episode doesn't mean a great deal, as their relationship changes on a daily basis. So the next episode will pick up the storylines we saw developing before this episode, such as Sam and Rebecca's romance, Ted's mental health struggles, Nate's battles with confidence and the darker side of his personality, and of course whether Richmond can make it back to the Premier League. Thank you for watching my recap and review of episode 9 of season 2 of Ted Lasso. I'll be back with episode 10 in a few days. Please subscribe to make sure you don't miss it. Goodbye.